Hey everyone, I'm gonna wait maybe about a minute or so, just because again, there's a lot of registrants, so I want to make sure that everybody has a chance to get here on time. So I'm just gonna set everything up before we get started, and I'll just wait till the participant ticker starts to kind of grind to a halt. So when I stop seeing people join. I hope everyone's doing well. It's super sunny today where I am in Montreal, so I hope you're all having good weather as well. And okay, cool. So it kind of looks like the amount of participants that are joining has kind of stopped, and it's 101. So I'm just going to get right on into it. Hi everybody. Like always, my name is Sophie, and I'm part of the customer success team based in Toronto. So thank you so much for joining us for today's Beyond the Basics webinar. And again, by the way, guys, if anyone needs to leave a little bit early, I'm recording this session like I usually do. And at the end of today, I'll send out an email with this recording so you can rewatch it on your own time. So if I go over anything a little too quickly, or if you need to stop and reference anything that I'm showing, you can always do so at your convenience. Okay, so before we begin, I do want to remind everyone that as this is a Beyond the Basics webinar, this is designed for users who are already on a trial and more or less familiar with building trips in the trip publisher. For any new users, I would suggest first joining the Introduction to Umapped webinar, which is hosted every Tuesday at 1 p.m. You can register for one of our upcoming intro webinars by going to umapped.com and clicking on the webinars button at the top. And you can see it's right there. Or you can always go to our support portal. We have a specific page on our support portal for all of our webinars. So just go to support.umapped.com and you'll see it's right there. I actually recently updated it to include all of the past and present Beyond the Basics webinars and every bootcamp we've ever done. But this is where you can find a recording of that intro webinar. So if you're still a little bit new and fresh, and this might be a lot of info at once and you're not really comfortable with the basics of trip building yet, I would highly encourage you to go watch that first. Okay, so let's go back to the agenda just so we can look at it together. So during today's webinar, we're going to be looking at how to get started with Sabre and Client Base, how to get set up with some of our other suppliers and integrations like Ultimate Jet Vacations, DMC Explorer, Project Expedition, and some more. So like Travel Contact and Tramada as well. We'll touch on all of these. And we'll also look at how to forward email confirmations. So I'm talking about Viator, Beds Online, Delta Vacations, Amadeus confirmations, and more. And lastly, I want to focus a little bit on OAG and our flight notifications because technically OAG is one of our integrations. They're, how your clients will receive notifications for flights. So if there's been a delay or a gate change, I just want to talk about how to get that set up and how OAG actually works, since I know occasionally some people might be a little fuzzy on what exactly flight tracking means. So I wanted to include that in there. So today I'm really looking at integrations and email forwarding, so you can see all of the ways in which you can incorporate the bookings that you've made externally into your trip publisher account. All right, so with that, let's get started. Okay, so I'm just gonna flip first to this slide that I've probably previously shown to some of you who've taken my boot camp, but this is gonna give us a good overview of what's involved with Sabre, Amadeus, Travelport, and some of our other integrations. Okay, so we're gonna start today off by looking a little bit more and discussing how to import from these different integrations and suppliers. So the first thing that is important to note is that the trip publisher is system agnostic. So this means that it doesn't matter which systems you do or do not use, the platform is essentially for everyone. However, we want to review some of the key GDS and system integrations available to you to make sure that if you do use any of these systems for your business, that you're leveraging the efficiency of the available integrations. Or if you're shopping around for a CRM or a booking platform, you'll know some of the options that are available to you. So let's take a quick look at each available integration and how they actually work. Based, of course, on the systems that you do and don't use, you'll receive a full setup and workflow instructions as part of the follow-up to today's webinar. So here's a little summary to kind of set your expectations. Okay, we're going to start with Sabre, since that's the first one on this list, and I would say that the overwhelming majority of our users use. Okay, so we're going to answer the questions today of what is the integration? Is there some kind of setup that's required to use this integration? And then how exactly it works. And we're going to do maybe a little demonstration for some of these as well, if I have examples. For ones like Amadeus, I don't really have an example with me right now, but I'll run you through how it would work. Okay, so turning first to Sabre. So to answer the question of what is the integration, there's actually two ways that you can use our Sabre integration. There's one, the Sabre Live integration. So this is an import of PNR data from your GDS account. So this is actually a live connection between your account in Sabre and the trip publisher. So there is there's always going to be that direct connection between the two. So if you make any updates in Sabre, you can always queue those to the trip publisher for any updates to be reflected in your trip. Or the second avenue that you can take with Sabre is more related to what we'll talk about with travel ports. So that's more of a copy paste of the PNR data from the Sabre website. So even if you use Sabre but you're not interested in getting that live integration, there's still an option for people that use Sabre but would prefer to keep things a little bit more manual. Maybe because you'd rather be in complete control of when you update things and would like to do everything from the trip publisher, not from an external system. Everyone has the reasons for why they might want to do one or the other. So for the question of, is there a setup required to use this integration? And for this, I'm going to directly be referring to the Sabre Live integration, not the other one. But yes, so for the Sabre Live integration, there is a one-time agency setup that's required. So if your agency is looking to get set up with the Sabre Live integration, all you need to do is reach out to support@umapped.com to confirm that you're ready to get started, and we'll send you all of the instructions that you need in order to get the integration set up. But there is a one-time agency setup, and then following that, every single agent that's part of your company will have access to the setup itself. Okay. And then moving on to the last question for Sabre, how does the integration actually work? So as I kind of alluded to earlier, this integration is a direct connection to your company's Sabre account, and it's a queue-based workflow where you can queue your PNRs into the trip publisher, and then they will become available in the booking inbox. So we're actually going to do a little example together to show you what that looks like. I'm going to go to a trip publisher account, and I'm going to start a brand new trip, and we're going to call this the sample Beyond the Basics trip. This is start date, an end date, create trip. I'm just going to put a cover photo because I am a little bit obsessed with having a good photo. I just want to have something there. And now we're going to go to the booking inbox. Now, when I'm importing from Sabre Live, it's not necessary for me to have already started a trip before importing my PNR. I could easily import my PNR from the booking inbox on the trips dashboard. It really doesn't matter. It depends 100% on your workflow. So if you had wanted to add a couple of things to your trip before importing your PNR, you can certainly start the trip first and maybe like add a note segment or add a little activity segment that wasn't part of the PNR, and then go ahead and import the PNR from the booking inbox. But you can always say, I'm just going to import my PNR straight away from the trips dashboard. No need to have a trip already started. And you can actually create a trip from that PNR. So actually, I'll stay on my dashboard here, and I'll go to the booking inbox. And here in the keyword field, we're going to put in my sample PNR. And now we're going to search for that. Since I'm set up with the Sabre Live integration, my PNR is going to pop up just like this. And I can click on the drop-down arrow if I want to view details of what's in this. You can see I got some accommodations, some flights, etc. And then clicking on the options icon just to the right of that will give me the ability to either create a brand new trip. Like I mentioned before, you don't have to have a trip already started. But since I do have a trip started, I can also just add it to that trip. So I'll do sample BTB trip, add to existing trip. And there we go. And see everything that was in that PNR. So all of the hotels, all of the flights have been added here in my trip with all of the information that was there. So that includes all of the passenger details, all of the additional airline details. If I had added any details for the hotel, those would be there as well. All of that's going to create these little discrete individual segments. So you can see for the W Barcelona, I've got a room right there. So that came in from Sabre. So like I said, everything that was in Sabre is going to automatically get imported into your trip. And if you ever have to make any updates, all you have to do is make those updates on the Sabre end, so from within Sabre, and then re-queue it to the trip publisher, and it will automatically make the edits on this end. So you actually, at some point, could completely forego logging into the trip publisher and just do all of your work from Sabre and just keep re-queuing it, because once you've queued it the first time and created a trip, you don't need to worry anymore. You can just keep working from Sabre, and this will update as you re-queue it in the future. So that's a really cool thing. So let's go quickly back to this sheet that I had, present again. And now that we've talked a little bit about Sabre Live, and we'll talk about the other method for importing from Sabre that I mentioned earlier when we get to Travelport, because for now we're just going to go straight to Amadeus. All right, so for Amadeus, first we're going to answer the question of what is the Amadeus integration in the trip publisher. So this is a bit of a misnomer because it's not an integration per se, but Amadeus is one of our supported suppliers for email confirmation forwarding. And what that means is you can actually take a confirmation email that you receive from Amadeus. So, the accommodation email, the confirmation email might include the hotels, the flights, maybe an activity, whatever you've booked in Amadeus. And you can actually take that email confirmation and then forward it to import@umapped.com. And I'll give you a little example. So we're going to log into my email really quickly. Now, I don't have an example from Amadeus just because I don't personally use Amadeus. But I do have an example using United Airlines, which is one of our supported suppliers for email forwarding. So this would be the exact same process that you'd go through with Amadeus. There's really no difference between what I'm doing now versus what you would do with an Amadeus email confirmation. It's the same steps. By the way, this is an old confirmation, so it's not going to appear in my booking inbox, unfortunately. I don't have like a more recent or future dated one, but the process is the same regardless. So I'm going to walk you through it. So we're going to take this email confirmation here and imagine that this is an Amadeus confirmation, and we're going to forward it to import@umapped.com. Not support@umapped.com. I've seen a lot of people accidentally write support@umapped.com, but it's import@umapped.com. And here you can take off any extraneous information like my email signatures. I'm just going to get rid of them because you don't need those. It's really only the email confirmation itself that you'll need. So we're going to keep everything the same in this email confirmation. We're not going to make any edits or any changes. We're just going to leave everything exactly as it is, and we're going to send it. Now, the one thing that you do want to make sure of is that you're sending this to import@umapped.com from the same email that's associated with your Umapped account. So if I was sending this from another email entirely, like you can see I have quite a few here. If I was sending it from another email entirely, it wouldn't actually know what account in the trip publisher to go into. So you want to make sure that you're sending the email confirmation from the exact same email that you use when you log into the trip publisher. But if you're not, if you're sending it from an entirely different email, maybe you're on another computer, or you have one email that you use for business and one that you use for confirming stuff. I'm not really sure. Whatever the case is, if you are using another email address, you can still forward this to the trip publisher. The only thing you're going to want to do is, instead of saying import at umapped.com, you're going to have to do import plus whatever your Umapped username is at umapped.com, if that makes sense. So this could be easily like import plus my username is travel advisor, so we're going to do import a travel advisor at umapped.com. You could do the sky's the limit, basically whatever your username is what I'm saying. So this is a way to circumvent if you're not using the same email that's associated with your Umapped account. So I'm just going to delete that. And I do, before we move on to the next question in the slide deck that I was showing before, just want to point out that on our support portal, there's an article called forwarding and importing Amadeus booking emails. And this will walk you through all of the steps in order to forward a confirmation email from Amadeus to the trip publisher with photos. So it shows you, that's the email address that you have to forward it to. And if you can't, this is the other way that you can do that, like example, import plus consultant at umapped.com. And it'll show you exactly what to do and how to add it to a trip. And you'll see in these photos that it looks exactly the same as when I was adding my Sabre Live PNR, because the look and feel of it is exactly the same. It's just the method of importing it that's different. But you'll see there's still that drop down arrow right here. There's still the options icon that I would use to add it to my trip or to create a brand new trip from. So you can see this is an example I did a while ago where I just blocked out all of the more sensitive information, but the look and feel is almost exactly the same. So I highly recommend that you come and reference this if you happen to use Amadeus, because this is a good walkthrough that you can reference when you're doing it for the first time yourself. Okay, so let's go back to the sheet. We're just going to look at the other questions. So of course, the easy answer to the next question, which is there a setup required to use this integration, is no, because it's an email confirmation that you're forwarding to the trip publisher. So there's no initial setup that's required for this sort of thing. That just comes by default. So you could basically start forwarding emails that are part of our supported supplier list from day one. You don't have to reach out to us to get any instructions on how to do it, unless you're a little bit confused about how exactly to go about doing it. There's no setup that's required. And then we talked about this a little bit during my demonstration, but to answer the last question of how does the integration work, it's just forwarding the Amadeus booking email to the trip publisher and then retrieving it from the booking inbox. So it's essentially copying and pasting all of the information from that original email. So again, because it's more of a copy and paste rather than a direct integration, if you make any updates to the booking in Amadeus, all you need to do is take a brand new, fresh email confirmation and then forward it to the trip publisher. So you just have to remember to either re-forward the entire email or you can always make the changes manually in the trip publisher, which honestly, sometimes if it's just like a flight that's been slightly changed, like the time was pushed back an hour or pushed forward a day or something like that, it's usually easier to just go in and manually make the changes in the trip publisher rather than re-forwarding a whole new email. But just to let you know, that's kind of the setup for if you need to make any updates to a booking that you had in Amadeus, just because it's not an actual direct integration. Okay, next we're going to go to Travelport. So this includes WorldSpan, Galileo, Apollo, and even though Sabre isn't part of WorldSpan, the other method that I mentioned earlier about importing from Sabre without the Sabre Live integration, that's going to be part of this little explanation as well. Okay, so the first question, of course, what is this particular integration? Again, this is kind of more of a misnomer as well, just because, again, it's not a direct integration to Travelport. It's just a copy and paste of the PNR data from Travelport's website. So we're essentially just scraping all of the information from Travelport and then taking that into the trip publisher. But we don't have any connection to the original content in the GDS. So when you make changes to a booking in Amadeus, or if you made the booking in Galileo, that booking, you just have to re-import it, or again, go into the trip publisher and just make the changes manually by clicking on the pencil icon for whatever you need to change. Really depends. Usually it's honestly, from what I've seen, it's a lot easier to just go into the trip publisher and make the changes manually. But again, just bringing that up. So for the second question of whether there's a setup required to use this integration, again, just like with Amadeus, because it's more of a copy paste, there is no setup that's required. The ability to import from Travelport is already going to be part of your trip publisher experience from day one. And we'll look in a second exactly where to find that. But again, nothing that you need to do on your end. Just comes available right away. And then for the last question of how exactly does this integration work, we're actually going to go back to the trip publisher and do a little walkthrough of exactly how to import from Travelport. Okay, so with Travelport, this is the only time where you absolutely actually do need to have a trip already started before you can start importing from Travelport. You'll notice that if I go back to my trip dashboard and go to the booking inbox, there's no option here for a PNR import. That's just not going to be found anywhere. The only way I can do that is by going into one of my trips that are already started. So I'll go back to the sample Beyond the Basics trip, and then going to the booking inbox from inside here. And now you'll see that second tab, PNR import, is available. So I can click on that. And for all of the different options, so whether it's Galileo Apollo or WorldSpan, or like I mentioned, if you want to use Sabre but you're not interested in the more live integration, all you have to do is choose, first of all, whatever it is. So we can choose Galileo Apollo, whatever the GDS is, sorry. Then you'll need to add the PNR and the lead passenger last name. So whatever the lead passenger is. So if there's a multitude of different passengers on the PNR, just whoever the first one is, you'll need their last name. And then click on import. And again, because it's not a direct integration, we're just scraping the data. Anytime that you need to make an update, if there's like maybe a particularly large update that needs to be made, just come right back here, right back to PNR import, put the exact same details in, and then click import all over again. This isn't actually an example, by the way, that's why it didn't work. But I just want to run you through how it works. Okay. So now let's go back to my slides. And now that we've looked at some of the GDS integrations, we're going to move on to our system integrations. So here we're going to talk about client base and some of our others like Travel Contact and Tramada, so that I can actually also talk to you about what those are. Because I know for some people, this might be the first time you're hearing about Travel Contact or Tramada. So if you're looking for CRMs, this might be a good opportunity for you to, see if this is the CRM you want to use or explore in the future. Okay, so we're going to start off with client base because that's one of our more robust system integrations. And we're going to start initially with the question of what is the client base integration? So this is simply just a sync of your res card data, and it's a continuous sync. It's not something that you need to action from client base's side. Essentially, as soon as you've got that client base connection set up, so once you've set up the integration, you don't need to push the res card from client base into the trip publisher. You'll just need to add it to your trip, and then any updates you made are automatically going to refresh, I think, once every 3 hours or so, something like that. So just like with Sabre, by the way, there is an initial setup that's required to use this integration. It's just a one-time agency setup. So you'll just have to contact support@umapped.com to initially get the ball rolling. We'll send you all of the instructions and just how to get started with the integration. But once it's been initially set up for your company, every single agent that's part of your company will have access to the same integration. So you don't need to do it like 6 times if you have 6 agents in your company. The first time is totally good. And now for the last question of how exactly does this integration work? So like I mentioned before, your res card data is synced daily, so like continuously throughout the day, and it becomes initially available in the booking inbox, which you then add to a trip. Once you've added it to a trip though, every time you make an update in client base, a couple hours later, it's automatically going to get synced up in the trip publisher and update for you. So you don't need to do something, you don't need to like re-queue it like you would with Sabre Live. It'll just do it for you. Okay, so we're going to go back to the trip publisher, and I'm just going to give you a quick run through of how it works for client base. And you're going to see that it looks very, very, very similar to Sabre Live. So just like with Sabre Live, I can do this from within a trip, or I can do it from the trip's dashboard. Again, there's not really a huge difference. It just depends on your workflow. So whether you're already trip building or you're starting from scratch. But let's say I've already got some stuff in my sample beyond the basics trip. So we'll go to the booking inbox from within my trip. And then just like when I put my PNR in before, we're going to put my res card number here in the keyword field. So this is an example that I have, 3434. And then we're going to click on search. And then again, you'll see that I can click down on the little drop-down arrow to see some details of this res card. And then I can add this to my trip just by clicking on the options icon. I can do this from outside of the trip as well, like I mentioned earlier, but right now I'm inside of the trip. So kind of like what I alluded to earlier, the other thing that I just wanted to mention is that once it's been added to a trip, the Umapped syncs to the TRAM central database 6 times a day. So if you make any edits in the original res card and client base, try to allow up to 3 hours or so for any new res cards or the edits to any existing res cards to be available in the trip publisher, just to kind of account for the Umapped sync frequency as well as your own company sync frequency. So all that to say that, if you were in client base and you had just finished making a res card, try to wait a couple of hours before it's available in the trip publisher. It's not going to be instantaneously available. So don't create a res card in client base and then automatically assume it's going to be ready in Umapped the next second. That's not how it's going to work. You might be super lucky and make it right before one of the sync times, because the sync times happen at the same time every day. I'm not really sure when they are. I think they're at like 3 a.m. or 6 a.m. or something like that. I'm not really sure. But 9 times out of 10, when you make your res card, it's not going to be ready the next day. Oh, sorry, my cat got distracted by something. I don't know if you can hear that. All right. Also, just note that any res cards that were created over 6 months prior to the date of import aren't going to be synced. So if you do have any old res cards, or if you started a res card maybe like a year before the actual trip, I have done this myself, so I've done this myself, but it's been a little while, so I'm a little fuzzy on exactly how. But you can copy and paste old res cards into a new res card. So if you started your res card over a year ago and now you're finally ready to import it into the trip publisher, just copy and paste it into a brand new res card so that it registers as having a new date. Because the res card itself, if it's over 6 months, is just not going to be available in the booking inbox. Okay. And then finally, by the way, since the client-based integration is a two-way integration, and for this, I'm actually just going to go to client-based in our support portal, Live Connect, user setup. So not only can you import bookings from ClientBase into the trip publisher like we just looked at, but you can also import bookings from the trip publisher back into ClientBase. So if you need to do some invoicing after you've made an initial trip in the trip publisher, you can do that. So this feature, like I said, is called the ClientBase Live Connect, and it's accessible within the ClientBase window by navigating to Utilities and then selecting Live Connect Providers, where Umapped is listed as a Live Connect provider, or from ClientBase Online by navigating to Tools and then Settings and then Live Connect Providers. So if you're curious at all of the steps are written in here in the support portal. It'll show you exactly where to go if you're using ClientBase Window or ClientBase Online. And if this is something that interests you and you have any further questions about it, you can also reach out to us at support@umapped.com, and we can always help you walk through how to set it up. But it's kind of cool because it allows you to make sure that everything is kept within both platforms. So making sure everything's in ClientBase that needs to be in ClientBase and everything that's in Umapped that needs to be in Umapped. Okay, so now let's go back to the, by the way, I know there are some questions waiting for me, but I want to go through all of this first and then we'll get to the questions. Okay. So last, I'm going to talk about Travel Contact and Tramada. Because I don't have access to either of those on my end, I'm just going to do a very cursory overview of what they are. And if you do have any more questions, we can always talk a little bit more about this at the end, because I do want to get to some of the other stuff as well. Okay. So for Travel Contact, this is a CRM and project management tool. So if you're in the market for one of those, I would highly recommend trying them out. They have a lot of really cool aspects to them, like you can do invoicing and keep all of your contacts together and do basic project management stuff within Travel Contact. But we essentially have a direct integration from Travel Contact to your trip publisher account. So that's what the Travel Contact integration is. So you can actually push and send your trips directly from Travel Contact to the trip publisher. And then once they're in the trip publisher, they'll already be auto-published. They might already have the traveler affixed to them if you added a traveler on Travel Contact side. But essentially, when you get back into Trip Publisher, all you need to do is add your final touches, like the destination content, any photos or activities or notes that you want to add. But the itinerary itself will be all put together already. So it's a really cool integration. Unlike some of the others that are on the agency setup side, this is actually a user setup that's required. So what that means is, even though we do have to do a setup for the entire agency at the very start, after that, every single user has to reach out to us when they want to get integrated with their company's Travel Contact configuration, integration. So if your company already uses Travel Contact and you don't, just send us an email so that we can get you set up as well. And then lastly, we have Tramada. I'm a little less familiar with Tramada, but very similarly, it has a CRM aspect to it and an invoicing component. And just like with Travel Contact, we have a direct integration with your Tramada account. So, and again, just like with Travel Contact, all you need to do is push your trip data from Tramada to the trip publisher. And then within the trip publisher, it will already have been auto-published. And all you need to do is add the final touches to the itinerary. The only difference between the Tramada integration and the Travel Contact is that this is, again, an agency setup. So just that one-time setup required for the agency as a whole. And then after that, you never need to have individual agents reach out to us. And to just give you a brief look at what it looks like when you have pushed a trip from either Travel Contact or Tramada into the trip publisher, I'm just going to log into my other account that's associated with those. And you'll see this is a trip, this right here, this trip for testing, that's a trip that I actually sent directly from Travel Contact into the trip publisher, and everything, I only put one segment in it, but everything that's inside of it is going to be here. It's already going to be published because it's automatically published when you send it from Travel Contact to the trip publisher. And my traveler is even actually already on it because I added my traveler in Travel Contact. And as for Tramada, when you send something from Tramada, it's going to have this interesting title of something like itinerary and costing full, or itinerary full, or just costing full. But again, it's automatically going to be published and the traveler is already going to be affixed to it. So that's just to give you an example of what it looks like once you've sent it to the trip publisher. Okay. So we've looked at all of the different GDS and system integrations. So everybody registered today is going to receive, all of the details and the follow-up email to make sure that if your account isn't already set up, that we can get that going. And if any of you would like to learn more about any of these system integrations or GDS integrations that we mentioned today, or if you have any suggestions for system integrations you'd like to see in the future, just let us know at support@umapped.com. Because again, like I've said 100 times in the past, but I will continue to repeat, the more people that we know are interested in a particular system integration, the more likely it is in the future. Okay. By the way, now that we've talked about the actual direct connections with Sabre and client base, I do also want to talk a little bit about using client base and Sabre when you don't have a direct integration. We did talk about this a little bit with Sabre, but I also want to talk about it with client base. One sec, I just have to open my door for my cat. She wants out. Okay, so we're going to go back to the trip publisher. We're just going to go back to my original account, travel advisor. Okay, we're just going to go to any trip that we already have open. So when you are going to be using Sabre or client base without the direct integration, you always have to start from within a trip. The option to access the PNR import button or upload from client base without the live integration isn't going to be available from the trip's dashboard. So you'll need to start at this point here from within a trip. Now, of course, we already talked about Sabre, but I'll just reiterate it again. We're going to go to import bookings and then come to the second tab, PNR import. And then from here, we just put the PNR, the lead passenger last name, and then choose Sabre from the GDS available. And if it's actually a real PNR, it will be success and you can go back in and see it. Now, as for client-based invoice PDFs, which is an option for those of you who aren't interested in getting the client-based integration, like the client-based sync integration, if you go to suppliers and then go to the second tab, PDF upload, there's actually an opportunity to choose client-based invoice and then upload a client-based invoice directly here. And then you can upload it into your trip. Now, of course, because you are uploading a PDF, it's not a direct integration to client base, but this is an option for those of you that maybe were a little bit wary when I talked about how client-based sync is a continuous sync. So even if you didn't want to update in Trip Publisher, it automatically is going to every like 3 or so hours. So if there are some of you who are like, well, I would prefer to be in control of when the updates happen, like I mentioned earlier with Sabre, this is always available to you. So it is a little bit more manual, and when you do have to make updates, it's a little bit more manual because you'll have to come back here to make your updates. But it does ensure that if you were a little bit unsure of client-based sync, you can still have a client-based account and a Umapped account. So there's something for everybody. There's also an option, by the way, for you to upload a Sabre trip case PDF. So I think this is a little bit more cumbersome than just going to import bookings and choosing the PNR import and doing it that way. But that's also an option as well if you really wanted to. But I feel like this is a tiny bit more cumbersome, but it's just an option for you. Okay, so we've looked at all of the different system and GDS integrations. So now we're going to move on to some of our supplier integrations. So we're going to navigate to suppliers. So again, for all of our supplier integrations, you do need to start initially from within a trip, just because these are suppliers and they're more affixed to trips than they are to the dashboard. So we also have a variety of supplier integrations which can be accessed from the left navigation of any trip. And while most of our suppliers require no setup to use, there are a few that do. And this includes like Project Expedition, DMC Explorer, and then also Ultimate Jet Vacations, which is actually going to be here in the booking inbox, you'll see. So that's also one that requires a tiny, tiny integration setup before you can actually access those bookings. So if you book and partner with any of these suppliers, please make sure to follow the instructions that are going to be shared with you after today's session so that you can get set up in order to import right away. This will save you a lot of time in the future when you're ready to import bookings because the setup will already be completed. And unlike the setup for any of the system or GDS integrations that I mentioned earlier, the setup for these supplier integrations is actually pretty quick. Like especially with like in Project Expedition bookings, we really just need to connect the two emails and then do a couple like little things on our end for it to be ready. So it really takes basically no time at all. So you could have this done in like half an hour if you reached out to us. But I just want to highlight those ones if you were ever looking to import with Project Expedition in the future so that you don't have to last minute reach out to us and say, oh no, I forgot to actually do the integration and I'm in a rush. So if you know you're going to use them, not a terrible time to reach out to us now. So just as a reminder, by the way, you can click on any supplier logo to learn a little bit more about how the integration works. So you'll see here, I clicked on Discovery DMC, and this takes either a reference number or a keyword, or Graves Tour LLC takes a reference number. So if you click on any of them, it's going to become pretty clear how to import from them. Or you can always go to our support portal, and you'll notice that at the very bottom, there's a section for supplier integrations. And this will list out the actual step-by-step instructions for every single supplier that we have. So if you use Classic Vacations, this is going to tell you exactly how to import from Classic Vacations. So if you have any questions about that, I would say this is your like one-stop shop. All right, so we're going to do a little example using, let's say, Insight Vacations, just to kind of show you how to use one of our suppliers. So I'm going to click on Insight Vacations, and then I'm only going to enter the destination or the name of the tour or itinerary, and then click on Search. And then from here, all I got to do is click on Details if I want to see what's involved with this tour. And if I like everything in it, I can import it into my trip. And now I'm just going to close this. Perfect. Like I said, if you have any questions about any of these different integrations, you can always reference the supplier integrations part of the Trip Publisher support portal, or you can reach out to us at support@umapped.com. And then, not lastly, but nearing to the last bit, I also want to talk a little bit about email confirmation forwarding. Now, we did kind of talk about this when we went through the steps for Amadeus earlier, but I also want to highlight the sheer number of supported suppliers for email confirmation forwarding, just because I feel like it's not something that's very evident, like when you first log into your Trip Publisher account. So I do want to spend a little bit of time explaining it. So we're going to go to the support article called Forwarding and Importing Supplier Email Confirmations. And, you know, if you're not set up with the GDS, or, you know, you book your travel directly with the hotel or airlines or a variety of different tour operators, I just want to highlight here that you can still import bookings from a large number of supported suppliers into your booking inbox by email. So you can find the list of supported suppliers initially from the forwarding and importing supplier email confirmation support article on our support solution. And of course, I'm also going to send this to everybody in a follow-up email to today's webinar. And these lists include a host of airlines, cruises, hotels, and more, notably like Delta Vacations, Amtrak Rail, Viator, Hertz Car Rentals, and more. And like I mentioned, this is also how you can import bookings from Amadeus. So you'll notice that, by the way, here there was 2 lists, so you can come to check them both out. But if I open up one of my lists, you'll notice that on this list, there's over 1,900 supported suppliers. So, and over 41 supported languages for all of these different supported suppliers. So I know that this might be a bit of a hurdle for you to just come in and say like, all right, let's look to see if I use any of the different suppliers on this sheet. But doing so might make you realize that something that you've been manually creating for a while now, you could actually have just been forwarding the email confirmation. And there's quite a lot of stuff here that people don't realize that, you know, is here. Like there's going to be some Airbnb here, there's going to be Expedia here, there's going to be all of the different airlines here. So if you book directly with an airline, I would especially say to come look at this, because most, if not all of the airlines are going to be here. Maybe not some of the newer ones, but this is a pretty extensive list. A ton of rail, so like Amtrak, ScotRail, Via Rail Canada, which I use basically all the time when I'm going between Toronto and Montreal. But that's all going to be here. You'll see like there's 6 different pages of all of this. So I would really recommend that you come and check this out, because I feel like there's probably a good chance that you use at least some of these. Maybe not all of them, but some of them. So like I mentioned earlier, if you have any questions about how to forward an email confirmation into the trip publisher, I would really recommend coming back to this page just to like, maybe the first time you do so, you do it while you're looking at the instructions and you take the initial email confirmation and forward it from your email. And then, you know, it says here, allow up to 30 minutes, but realistically, it's about 5 to 8 minutes or so. And then when you go to, let me just log into the account that's associated with that email. When you go to the booking inbox, you're going to see it right here in your booking inbox. And if you don't, for some reason, like I do right now, I don't see anything, you can always come and double check in your email API log. And this is going to tell you exactly when you last forwarded something and if it was successful or not. So you can see earlier today with you guys, I forwarded the United Airlines confirmation into the trip publisher. I forwarded it like at 1:15 and it was successful, but the only reason I don't see it is because there was no segments in that email confirmation, just because this is from January. So obviously it's a past booking. It's not going to be available in the booking inbox, but you can see a couple of times it was, and there was 3 segments extracted. You can see all of the times basically when I've ever imported something from an email. Yeah, so this can be super, super helpful, by the way, if you ever use any of these different airlines, because basically they've all worked. Okay. So we're just going to go back to this support article really quickly, because of course I also do want to touch on some of the reasons why it might not have been successful. Like I did show you guys that all of mine have more or less been successful, but you might also see here like not successful or for some reason. And there are a lot of reasons why it might say not successful. So I just want to go through those. So you can see here, we've got a little list just telling you why something might not have worked. But then honestly, the number one reason it's going to say unsuccessful or you're not going to see it in the booking inbox is if you had tried to forward an email that wasn't part of our supported supplier list. That's why I would recommend you check these out and cross-reference them beforehand, because I have had people reach out to me and say like, I forwarded this email confirmation from the Rosewood Hotel. How come it didn't work? It's because they didn't check prior whether the Rosewood was on the supported supplier list, and it just unfortunately wasn't. So always double check beforehand just to make sure that you're not waiting those 5 to 8 minutes and then disappointed afterwards. Another reason that it might be unsuccessful, and I kind of alluded to this earlier, but I was forwarding this to import@umapped.com, I did also mention to not make any edits or changes to the what's inside the actual confirmation email. You want it to stay exactly the same way as it appears here. Because if you make any edits, like if I had, moved the times around or put, the arrival before the departure for some reason, that could actually impact how we receive it, because we have this certain format or template recognized. So if you move anything around or take something out, like if you took out the flight distance, that might mess up what we're receiving, and it might not successfully forward into the trip publisher. So just leave this exactly the way that it is. If you do need to make edits, just make them manually once it's actually in the trip publisher. When I imported this a while ago and it was successful, I made a trip. So I'm just gonna pull out that trip. It's this guy right here, trip to Deer Valley. So this is what was inside that email confirmation. You can see, by the way, all of the airline segments made perfect little discrete air segments. So all good there. But if I didn't want some of the information to show, like I wasn't interested in the class or something showing, don't make the edits in the actual email. Make the edit in the trip publisher. That way it still imports correctly. And then update that. Or you can take like this out if you wanted to. And the last reason that it might not import is actually what I just showed you guys, if it's a past dated booking. So you'll notice when I was over there in my booking inbox looking at the email API log, even though this United Airlines confirmation email was successfully parsed, for some reason there was 0 segments, even though just a couple of weeks ago it was perfectly fine. And that's because it's a past dated booking. As soon as it was after January 29th, you'll see like the 22nd worked perfectly, the 5th never worked again, because this stopped being an active booking on the 29th. So if it's a past dated booking, it's obviously just not going to import it into the booking inbox, because essentially the travel date has already passed. Okay. So now the last thing I want to talk about today, now that I've gone through everything to do with email confirmations, is just to briefly talk about flight notifications and OAG. And I know we're reaching the hour mark, so thank you everybody for your patience. I'm going to try to breeze through this next part, and then we'll get to questions. All right, so let's briefly navigate to our preferences to now take a bit of time to discuss flight notifications and how they work, since they technically are one of our integrations. We're going to go to preferences. And then you can see that there in your preferences, there's an option for flight notifications. So when you have this ticked on, like I do right now, you can see that it's blue or to the right, however you want to call it. This means that it's currently on, so my flight notifications are active. And by enabling this preference, it allows travelers on a trip to receive notifications by email, on the web, and via the mobile app of any day of flight delays or gate changes or even cancellations. So if I go to a past trip, I can actually show you what these would look like. I'll just go to one of my past trips. I'm just going to open up my messages and just go to any one of these. So you can see this is one of the chats for an Air Canada flight segment. And you'll see I've got actually some flight reminder. I got a flight reminder here from OAG, and I also got a gate change announcement. So you can see that my new gate was actually announced here. And so this is just a way that your clients can get additional last minute information when they're about to get to their flight. Now, flight tracking only starts 24 hours prior to the scheduled departure time. So, if there's been an update to the flight schedule a week before the flight, there's not going to be any messages here, because this is really meant as a last minute resort. These are really just to keep your clients informed of when they're on the way to the airport. Do they need to be aware of a gate change? Do they need to know if their flight was canceled and contact you, or contact the actual airline? It's just to keep them privy to those last minute, really sensitive information. So this isn't a substitute for if you need to make an edit to a flight. So if like a month before the trip, you know that the flight got bumped back an hour, you'll actually have to make those changes manually. It's not going to appear as a message here. So this is really meant for your clients. Not you'll see them as well, but they're not meant for just you. They're for both of you guys. All right. And outside of just the messages that your clients and yourself will receive the day of the flight, I do also want to talk about some of the other ways that OAG works when you add flights manually. So let's go back to one of my trips. We'll go to this guy right here, sample beyond the basics trip. And let's go to add a flight manually. Now you'll notice that when I add a flight like Air Canada, Flight 101, some information is automatically going to populate for the departure and arrival airports, the departure and arrival times, and all that fun stuff. Now, our system will auto-populate information from historical flight data. So if a flight number hasn't been used previously, then we're not going to have any flight information saved for that flight. So these fields aren't going to populate if nobody's ever used the flight in Umapped before, since we're this isn't a live integration with our flight tracker, but rather pulls from previous data. Or, if a flight was used previously, it may have been a while, and, given the current circumstances, it's likely that flight patterns and times have changed since the last time that flight was entered into our system. So essentially, if you notice that any of this information that auto-populates is a little inaccurate, like maybe actually now Air Canada 101 is actually at 8 a.m. and arrives at 9:44 a.m., even though it said 7 and 8 before, that's just because it's based on historical flight data. So just double check this information before you add it, just to be 100% sure. But once you've added this, if I go ahead and add this to my, I need the departure and arrival dates, I'm silly. So once you've gone ahead and added that to your trip, 24 hours prior to departure, when you start receiving those, flight reminders or delays or cancellation notices, our system is actually going to save and store that information. So for example, if a flight time has been updated or the flight number has been recycled for a new departure or arrival destination, all of that's going to get saved. And in the future, if you go to add Air Canada Flight 101, this information is going to get saved in our system, and that's what's going to auto-populate. So I just want to address that because I know I've gotten some questions before about like why the flight flight information that's auto-populating isn't 100% correct. It's just because it's not a live integration. It's just based on historical data. Okay, so let's go back to the agenda and let's review what we've done today. All right, so over the course of this webinar, we've looked at getting integrated with all of our different GDS and system integrations and how to use them and what they're used for. We've also looked at how to get set up with some of our supplier integrations like UJV, DMC Explorer, Project Expedition, and more. And we've looked extensively at how to forward email confirmations. So from Viator, from Bets Online, from Amadeus, from United Airlines, and all that stuff. And by the way, if you are a little bit curious about how this works or you want to see it in person, I'm going to be releasing a video on our social media soon that really goes through all of the steps on how to forward an email confirmation. So keep an eye out for, I think, this Thursday when I post that video. It'll just give a really, really good, like I said, like a 3-minute long video, but it walks you through all of the steps because it uses this flight confirmation back when it actually worked. All right, and we've also, of course, touched on OAG and flight notifications and how exactly those work. So now at this point, we're nearing the hour mark. I understand that. So if you need to leave, I totally understand. And I am going to be sending out a copy of this along with a lot of additional instructions on getting set up with all of these different integrations and using email forwarding. So if you need to leave, and totally okay, I'll reach out to you soon. But if not, I'm going to get to all of your questions right now. And if you can't stay to hear me respond to a question you've left, don't worry. Like I said, I'm recording all of this. You'll still have an opportunity to watch me later on today respond to your questions. So I'm just going to take a sip of water and get right into it. Okay, so Rosa Lara asked, is Clientbase already compatible with Mac? Last year, they were only with Windows. I don't know about, so you remember earlier when I was talking about, let me just go back to the Clientbase Live Connect article. Live Connect stuff. I was talking about Clientbase Window versus Clientbase Online. Now, I don't know if Client-Based Window is only available for Windows users. I think maybe by the name it is, but I can absolutely guarantee you that Client-Based Online can be used by Mac users, because I actually have a Client-Based account. So, and I'm using a Mac Air right now. So you'll see I actually have a Client-Based account. Oh, I think I accidentally clicked on set password or something. Whatever, it's fine. Either way, you can use this on a Mac, as you can see, because I'm actually accessing the website. So if you haven't used Client-Based before and you are considering it, you can use Client-Based online with your Mac. I don't know about Window, because I'm not sure if that's just because it's a separate window entirely or because it's only used by Windows users. But you can always reach out to Client-Based. I think they have a pretty responsive support email address, and just double check. But at the very least, you know that one of their products, the online website, is available for Mac users. So 100% for that one. Okay, so let's see. There's some other questions as well. Oh yeah, so David asked, how do you get the hotels to link automatically and put in the pictures? That's actually a really good question. So I've had people ask this before, but you may have noticed that when I imported this PNR, all of the information from the vendor profile automatically got linked. So that means all of the address information. In this case, there's also a phone number and all of the photos. And this is because the name in Sabre is the exact same name that's in my vendor profile. So we actually have an ability with the trip publisher to match a vendor that's coming in from one of our system integrations or GDS integrations with whatever in your vendor database. So the Lanesboro, for example, was already in the public vendor database and it had all of this information. And in Sabre, this booking was called the Lanesboro. So the name was exactly the same. And that's why when I imported the PNR from Sabre Live, it automatically matched to what was in my vendor database. And all of this information automatically synced. You will have times when it doesn't automatically sync, but that's likely because the name is different from what's in your GDS. So if this had been called just, maybe Lane or something like that, rather than the Lanesboro Oxter collection, if the name was really, really different than what was in my vendor database, it wouldn't match because it wouldn't know that like it's not going to make a jump that big, essentially was what I'm saying. Like if this hotel was actually called in Sabre like Sophie's Example Hotel or something like that, but it was really the Lanesboro, and I have a vendor profile called the Lanesboro, but the name in Sabre and the name in my vendor database are entirely different, it's not going to automatically make the association. So the names do have to be the same. That being said, if you had, like, let's say I was importing this accommodation and I called it, and it came in as like Laneboro, something like this. I'm just doing this as a really quick example. I can't really import it from Sabre because it is spelled correctly in Sabre, but let's say it was spelled like this in Sabre, so when I imported, nothing matched up. You can still force the match. And this is how you can force the match. It's a little more cumbersome, but it's at least a last minute thing you can do. You're gonna come to the hotel segment that you just imported and click on the little pencil icon, and you're gonna change the name of the hotel to whatever the correct spelling or the correct name is. So in this case, it's the Lanesboro Oxter collection. And you see that I clicked on one of the suggestions from my vendor database and it matched up. And now I can update it. And all of the information that was there before, like the dates, you know, I added October 13th to the 22nd. All of the information that I had added previously is still going to be there, but it will sync to what was in my vendor database. So just to reiterate that, you want to make sure that the name in, you know, Sabre or Apollo or whatever system you're using is the same that's in the vendor database, whether it's in our public database or in something personal that you've added, because that's still possible. You just want to make sure that they're close enough that our system can recognize that they're supposed to be the same and then match them up. I hope that makes sense. The first time I heard this, I was a little like confused as well. But that's the best explanation I can give. David also asked, are you going to set up travel contact to do push/pull? So at the moment, I'm not sure about the future, but at the moment, right now, the integration between travel contact and the trip publisher is just a push from travel contact to trip publisher. So it's not a two-way connection at the moment. You're only importing information from travel contact. I don't know about the future. Things may change. We may look at improving the integration in the future. That's more on the product end, and I'm not really part of the product team. So if I ever hear any more news on that, of course, everybody will know right away. But at the moment, it's just that one-way integration. So Grace asked, seems like when I try to add a hotel directly, so not from a supplier email or the GDS, the hotel pictures are never there. Clients love pictures. So that's a good question. This has to do more with vendors, but I will just go to the library very quickly and go to vendors. So I may have mentioned this in past webinars that had to do more with vendors, but I'll kind of reiterate today if anyone wasn't there for those webinars. But we do have a pretty extensive public vendor database. It comes from two different feeds. I think one is the travel tech feed. That's where we get all of our cruises. And then there's also another feed, but I can't remember the name of it. But we get all of our hotels from that other feed and our car rental services. There's a couple other things in here. So you can always come to your vendors and check to see whether or not something is actually here. Like most of the larger chains, such as Four Seasons, are already going to be here. You'll see like there's one of the Beverly Hills one, there's this Toronto one, there's the Four Seasons Resort and Club Dallas, all that kind of stuff. So for sure, all of the larger ones are here. But if it's a more niche hotel or if it's a little bit smaller, it is possible that it's not in our public database. That happens. Unfortunately, we can't get every single hotel in the world in the database, although we do try to add more to this and the feed is updated on a regular basis. But again, if something isn't part of our database, there's no reason why you can't add to the database because there's, you know, like you can see right here, there's that little blue plus button, and that gives you the ability to actually add your own vendor. So if you work with a hotel really, really often, and it doesn't already exist in our public data vendor base, but you know you want to take the time to add all of the photos that your clients are really going to like to look at, or add the information like the address and the contact info. So if they need to get in touch with the hotel, they have the ability to do that. You can always come here to the vendor database and just add it yourself. I'm not going to get too into this today because it's a very long discussion. I could do a whole nother hour just on vendors. So I would really urge, if you haven't already looked at it, to go to support.umapped.com. And you'll see in webinars, under articles, there's going to be, I think it's 2021, I did a couple of Beyond the Basics about vendors. Yeah, this one right here, all about vendors. So I would really, really encourage you to rewatch this because I think this is like a 45-minute webinar just on vendors. So it does a lot more justice than I can do in this brief little blurb that I'm giving. Okay, no problem, Grace. I hope that helps. There's still some more questions. I want to make sure I can answer all of those before we leave. Heather asked if we integrate with Travel Joy. At the moment, no, we don't, but I'd love to hear if anybody else uses Travel Joy. So if you use any other systems than what I mentioned today, if you use any other systems that what I mentioned today, we definitely don't have an integration with them, unfortunately. But let me know, because like I said, the more I know, I actually am in the background putting together a list of the top other systems that people use, and every single vote gets added to that list. So it just helps me for tracking purposes to know, like, does 35% of the people who use the trip publisher also use TravelJoy? Something like that. That's just a random example. But so if you use any other systems, like, leave them in the comments here. I look through these after the webinars. I'll look through them later today. Leave us an email. Just any way you want to get in touch with us, it gets added to a list. So don't worry. And then Stephanie asked, what about hotel pricing? So that's a good question. So when I imported the PNR from Sabre earlier today, that I just didn't have any pricing information in Sabre. I only had, sorry, for the hotel, not for flight. I only had like the room details. But if you have pricing information in Sabre, or, you know, in client base, or in any of these different segments, it will come through. We just take all of the information that's in one of those integrated systems. So in this case, I just didn't have any in my sample PNR, but if you did have some, it would automatically come through. It's just about, you know, whether or not it's included in your initial booking. I just didn't have any for my example, but absolutely it would come through as well, just like this room did. And for Stephanie also asked, for the PNR re-import, will it delete old info? It's been a while since I've tested this, but I believe, yes, it does refresh whatever segments you originally had in there. But I could be wrong. It's been a while since I've tested that, though. If anyone wants to send me some PNRs so that I can use those as examples in the future, please let me know, because I have to get these from anyone who offers them to me. Okay. Oh, and Susanna, by the way, thanks for letting me know about TravelJoy. I noted that down. And I'm just going to wait to see if there's any more questions, since it's been an hour and 15 minutes, and that's a lot of time for somebody to talk. So I'm just going to wait, and if not, we'll end this. Okay, so it doesn't look like there's any more questions, but even if a question occurs to anybody later on, you can always reach out to us at support@umapped.com, and we'll get back to you as soon as we can. So thanks everybody so much for all of your participation and your questions. I hope this was helpful, and I'll get back to all of you soon with an email, including the instructions for all of the integrations we talked about today, and how you can get started yourself if you've been using any of these and just didn't have the opportunity to get set up earlier. So thanks so much, and have a great rest of your day, everybody. Take care.